The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the kind that comforts you. This was the kind of silence that felt like it was hiding something. Shanna Moakler stood barefoot in the hallway of their Calabasas home, the marble floor cold beneath her feet. It was nearly 2:17 in the morning. She hadn't planned on waking up. But something inside her had. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was something far worse. It was a feeling. You know that feeling. The one you can't explain. The one that creeps into your chest without permission. The feeling that something isn't right. She glanced toward the bedroom. Empty. The sheets on Travis's side were untouched. Cold. That's when she heard it. A faint vibration. Not from the bedroom. From downstairs. Her heart didn't start racing immediately. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he went to his studio. Maybe he just needed space. But deep down, she already knew. And what she would discover in the coming weeks would destroy everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the man she married. But what happened next? No one saw coming. This story isn't about headlines. It's about what happens when trust begins to fracture in silence. It's about how fame can blur boundaries. And how sometimes the most painful betrayals don't begin with physical touch. They begin with emotional distance. To understand what really happened, we have to go back to the beginning. Before the accusations. Before the divorce. Before the world started whispering Kim Kardashian's name into their story. Back to when everything still felt real. Back to when Shanna believed she was living her forever. Shanna met Travis during a time when both of their lives were already moving at dangerous speeds. Travis wasn't just a drummer. He was a force. As a member of Blink-182, he wasn't just playing music. He was shaping a generation. Their songs weren't background noise. They were identity. They were rebellion. They were emotion. And Travis lived inside that energy. He moved fast. Thought fast. Loved fast. Shanna was different. She had her own spotlight. A former beauty queen. Confident. Sharp. Emotionally intuitive in ways most people weren't. When they first met, there was no hesitation. No slow build. No cautious distance. It was immediate. Intense. Magnetic. Friends would later say they looked at each other like the rest of the world didn't exist. And for a while, it didn't. Their relationship was passionate, raw, unfiltered. They fought loudly, loved louder. But that intensity was part of the attraction. It made everything feel alive. When they married in 2004, it didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like destiny. They built a life together in Calabasas. They had children. They created routines, private jokes, late-night conversations, moments no one else saw, moments that felt permanent. But permanence is fragile. And sometimes, it begins to crack long before anyone notices. Fame changes people. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's invisible. Sometimes it's just enough to create distance where there was once closeness. Travis's career was evolving. His schedule became unpredictable. Late nights became normal. Phone calls at strange hours. Text messages that made him smile in ways Shanna couldn't explain. At first, she didn't question it. She trusted him. Trust isn't something you analyze. It's something you feel. Until one day, you don't. And once that feeling changes, everything changes. It started with small things. Small enough to ignore. Small enough to rationalize. He began guarding his phone differently. Turning it away when messages appeared. Locking the screen faster. Leaving rooms to answer calls. First, Shanna told herself she was overthinking. She didn't want to be that person. The suspicious wife. The insecure partner. Because insecurity can destroy relationships faster than betrayal itself. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew. Quietly. Patiently. Like a storm waiting for permission to arrive. And then one night, she heard a name. Not directly. Not clearly. but clearly enough. Kim. She didn't react immediately. Because Kim wasn't just any name. Kim was someone they both knew. Someone who existed inside their extended world. Someone familiar. Someone safe. Or at least, someone who was supposed to be. But what Shanna didn't realize yet was that this name would soon become the center of her unraveling. At that time, Kim Kardashian wasn't yet the global empire she would become. She was known, visible, present in Hollywood circles. But she hadn't yet reached the level of cultural dominance that would later define her. She moved in similar spaces. Events. Parties. Industry gatherings. She wasn't a stranger. She was part of the environment. And environments create proximity. Proximity creates familiarity. And familiarity can create emotional danger, even when no one intends it. Or at least, that's what people tell themselves. The first time Shanna truly felt afraid wasn't when she heard Kim's name. It was when she saw Travis's face when he mentioned her. There was something different. Something subtle, but undeniable. A shift. A light. A curiosity that didn't belong to a married man. It wasn't physical. Not yet. It was emotional. And emotional connections are often far more powerful because they begin in silence. They grow in imagination. They live in spaces no one else can see. And once they exist, they are almost impossible to erase. Shanna didn't confront him immediately, because confrontation makes things real. And she wasn't ready for reality. Instead, she watched, observed, listened. She paid attention to things she had never noticed before. How quickly he responded to certain messages. How his energy shifted after certain phone calls. How emotionally distant he became afterward. It wasn't constant, but it was enough. Enough to create doubt. Enough to create fear. Enough to create the question that would haunt her every night. Is he still mine? Or have I already lost him? But the truth was still coming. And when it arrived, it wouldn't come gently. It would come in a way that would leave permanent scars. Because sometimes, the moment that destroys your life doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable, until you realize it changed everything. And what Shanna would soon discover would not just threaten her marriage. It would rewrite her entire understanding of love, loyalty, and betrayal. And the most painful part? It wasn't what Travis said. It wasn't what Kim did. It was what Shanna began to realize on her own. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes, you feel it before you ever see it. And what happened next would push their marriage to a point of no return. The first real fracture didn't sound like breaking glass. It sounded like laughter. Soft, private, and not meant for her. It was late afternoon, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows of their Calabasas home, painting long shadows across the living room floor. Shanna stood in the kitchen, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone while waiting for water to boil. Upstairs, she could hear Travis. He was on the phone. At first, she didn't pay attention. Phone calls were normal. His life was built on communication. Managers, producers, friends, endless conversations. But then she heard it again. That laugh. Not his public laugh. Not the one he gave interviewers or fans. This was different. This was softer, warmer, more vulnerable. It was the laugh of a man who felt seen. And that's when something inside her chest tightened. Because she realized something she didn't want to admit. He hadn't laughed like that with her in a long time. And suddenly, the silence in their relationship felt louder than ever. You have to understand something about intuition. It doesn't arrive with evidence. It arrives with discomfort. It arrives with questions that have no immediate answers. And Shanna was beginning to live inside those questions. When Travis came downstairs, his expression was calm, normal, unbothered. Too normal. He kissed her lightly on the cheek as he walked past. "Hey," he said casually. She forced a smile. "Hey." She wanted to ask, She wanted to say the name that had been echoing in her mind. Kim. But she didn't. Because asking the question meant being ready for the answer. And she wasn't ready. Not yet. At that time, their lives were still intertwined in ways that made separation unimaginable. They shared children, memories, inside jokes, years of emotional investment. But something invisible had begun to grow between them. Distance. Not physical distance. Emotional distance. The kind that slowly replaces familiarity with uncertainty. The kind that turns eye contact into avoidance. The kind that makes two people feel like strangers inside their own home. And what made it worse was that no one else could see it. From the outside, they were still them. Still married. Still functioning. Still smiling in public. But inside those walls, everything was changing. The next moment didn't happen dramatically. There was no confrontation. No shouting. No confession. It happened quietly. One night, while Travis was in the shower, his phone lit up. Just once. A simple notification. The screen glowed against the darkness of the bedroom. Shanna wasn't trying to invade his privacy. At least, that's what she told herself. She was just looking. Just curious. Just trying to silence the voice in her head. She picked up the phone slowly. Her fingers hesitated. Her heart beat harder with every second. And then she saw it. A name. Kim. Just that. Kim. No last name needed. No explanation required. Because in that moment, Shanna didn't need context. She needed courage. But courage didn't come. Fear did. Fear of confirming what she already felt. Fear of destroying the fragile illusion of safety she was still holding on to. She didn't open the message. She didn't scroll. She didn't investigate further. Instead, she put the phone back exactly where she found it. And pretended she never saw it. Because sometimes, denial feels safer than truth. But denial never lasts forever. And the human heart always demands resolution. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into emotional distance. Travis wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. But he was elsewhere. Not physically. Mentally. Emotionally. He was present. But not fully there. And that's what hurt the most. It wasn't betrayal. It was absence. And absence can destroy love just as effectively. Shanna began noticing patterns. Patterns she couldn't ignore. He spent more time on his phone late at night. He smiled at messages he didn't explain. He became protective of his private world in ways he never had before. And each time it happened, her anxiety deepened. Her thoughts spiraled. Her imagination filled in blanks her reality hadn't confirmed. But imagination can be more painful than truth. Because imagination has no limits. One evening, they attended an industry event together. The room was filled with familiar faces. Music played softly. Conversations overlapped. Champagne glasses clinked. Everything looked normal. Until Shanna saw her. Across the room, Kim Kardashian stood near a group of people, laughing gently, her presence calm but magnetic. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't approaching Travis. She wasn't crossing boundaries. She was simply existing. But what mattered wasn't what she did. It was what Shanna saw in Travis. His eyes found Kim without effort. Not intentionally. Not obviously. But instinctively. Like muscle memory. And in that moment, Shanna understood something terrifying. This wasn't about opportunity. This was about emotional gravity. He wasn't choosing to look. He was drawn. And when Kim eventually walked over to greet them, everything felt slower. More fragile. More dangerous. Her voice was polite. Warm. Respectful. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone else would question. But Shanna noticed something most people wouldn't. Comfort. Familiarity. An ease between them that didn't belong to strangers. It wasn't physical. It wasn't romantic. But it wasn't neutral either. It was emotional territory that made Shanna feel like an outsider in her own marriage. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt before. Replaceable. That night, after they returned home, the silence between them was unbearable. Travis didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and didn't know how to fix it. He went about his routine, brushing his teeth, checking his phone, preparing for sleep, while Shanna sat on the edge of the bed, trapped inside her thoughts. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted answers. But most of all, she wanted the truth. Because uncertainty is a prison with no exit. Finally, she spoke. Her voice quiet. Fragile. Are you happy? Travis looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? She hesitated. Because this was the moment. The moment where everything could change. She said softly. Are you happy with us? He didn't answer immediately. And sometimes, silence is the loudest answer of all. That pause lasted only seconds. But to Shanna, it felt like forever. Because inside that silence, she heard everything she needed to know. And even though he eventually said yes, something inside her no longer believed it. Because love doesn't live in words. It lives in presence. It lives in attention. It lives in emotional availability. And she could feel his slipping away. Slowly. Quietly. Irreversibly. What happened next didn't destroy their marriage overnight. It destroyed it gradually. Through distance. Through unanswered questions. Through emotional absence. But the true breaking point was still coming. And when it arrived, there would be no pretending anymore. Because sometimes, the moment you fear the most becomes the moment that sets you free. Or breaks you completely. There's a moment in every breaking relationship that doesn't look dramatic. There's no screaming. No doors slamming. No explosive confession. Just a quiet realization that something irreversible has already happened. For Shanna, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday night. The kind of night that wasn't supposed to matter. The kind of night that wasn't supposed to become a memory. And yet, it became the night she stopped recognizing her own life. The house was dimly lit. A single lamp glowed in the living room. Outside, the world moved normally. Cars passed. People lived their lives. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. Travis sat on the couch, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. His phone was in his hands, but he wasn't typing. He was reading. Focused. Emotionally present. But not with her. Shanna stood in the hallway watching him. Not hiding. Not spying. Just observing. Because sometimes, distance reveals itself in the smallest behaviors. He didn't notice her at first. And in that moment, she saw something she couldn't unsee. Peace. But not the kind of peace that comes from being at home with your wife. It was the peace of emotional escape. The peace of being somewhere else mentally. With someone else emotionally. And that realization landed inside her chest like weight she couldn't carry anymore. She walked into the room slowly. He looked up. Smiled lightly. Hey, he said. The same word. The same tone. The same normalcy. But nothing about it felt normal anymore. She sat across from him. Not next to him. Across. That distance wasn't accidental. It was emotional. She looked at him carefully, trying to find the man she married inside the man sitting in front of her. And for the first time, she wasn't sure he was still there. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Too calm. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Of course. There was no tension in his voice. No fear. And somehow, that made it worse. She swallowed carefully. Her throat felt tight. When you talked to her, she paused. Even saying the words felt dangerous. What do you talk about? He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't hear her, but because he understood exactly who she meant. He leaned back slightly. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Just thoughtful. It's nothing, he said. Nothing. That word. That single word. It was supposed to make everything feel safe. Instead, it made everything feel fragile. Because nothing is often the word people use when they don't want to explain something complicated, or something emotional, or something real. Shanna didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. She didn't attack him. She simply asked the question that had been haunting her for weeks. Are you emotionally involved with her? The room felt colder. Not physically. Emotionally. Travis looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, there was no easy answer. Because emotional truth doesn't live in black and white. It lives in gray areas. In feelings people don't plan. In connections people don't expect. In moments that slowly become something more without anyone realizing it. I'm not cheating on you, he said. And technically, that may have been true. But cheating isn't always physical. Sometimes, it's emotional absence. Sometimes, it's emotional availability given to someone else. And Shanna felt that difference with painful clarity. She studied his face. Every micro-expression. Every hesitation. Every flicker of emotion. Because she wasn't listening to his words. She was listening to what existed beneath them. Do you care about her? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. Final. He didn't answer right away. And that silence told her everything. Because people hesitate when they're trying not to hurt you. Or when they're trying not to reveal something they don't fully understand themselves. It's not like that, he said quietly. But what did that even mean? Not like what? Not like love? Not like attraction? Not like emotional dependence? Ambiguity is where relationships go to die. And in that moment, something inside Shanna shifted permanently. Not because he confessed to something undeniable, but because he didn't fight for certainty. He didn't close the emotional door completely. He left it slightly open. And that opening was enough to destroy her sense of safety, because she realized something terrifying. She wasn't competing with a person. She was competing with a feeling. And feelings are impossible to control. That night, after the conversation ended, they didn't argue. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They simply existed in the same space. As strangers, they went to bed without touching, without speaking, without resolving anything. Because sometimes, the most painful fights are the ones that never happen. The ones that live entirely inside your mind. Shanna lay awake staring at the ceiling, her thoughts moving faster than she could control. She replayed every moment of their relationship. Every memory. Every promise. Every look. Searching for the exact point where things began to change. But relationships don't break in a single moment. They break slowly. Through neglect. Through emotional drift. Through unspoken truths. And she realized something she wasn't ready to accept. She had been losing him for a long time. She just didn't know when it started. Days passed. And nothing improved. Travis wasn't cruel. He wasn't dismissive. But he wasn't fully present either. He existed beside her. But not with her. And that distinction made all the difference. He still came home. Still spoke kindly. Still functioned as part of their shared life. But emotionally, he felt distant. Unavailable. Disconnected. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach him. One afternoon, while sitting alone in their home, Shanna faced the question she had been avoiding. Not whether he loved Kim. Not whether he betrayed her physically. But something far more painful. Did he still love her the same way? Because love doesn't disappear instantly. It fades. Gradually. Quietly. Until one day, you realize it's gone. And that realization doesn't feel explosive. It feels empty. She thought about confronting Kim directly. Demanding answers. Demanding clarity. Demanding truth. But deep down, she knew something. This wasn't about Kim. This was about Travis. This was about emotional space he had allowed someone else to occupy. Whether intentionally or unintentionally. And that emotional shift was something no confrontation could undo. Because once someone begins emotionally detaching, it's almost impossible to force them back. Then came the moment that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Simple. Final. Travis came home later than usual. Not extremely late. Just late enough. Late enough for her to notice. Late enough for her to feel it. He walked inside calmly. Relaxed. Emotionally neutral. And that's when she realized something with devastating clarity. He didn't feel guilty. Not because he didn't care. But because, in his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. And that realization broke her more than any confession ever could. Because emotional betrayal doesn't always feel like betrayal to the person committing it. Sometimes, it just feels like connection. And connection is hard to argue against. That night, Shanna sat alone in the dark long after he fell asleep. And for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility she had been avoiding. Their marriage might already be over.